This conference will now be recorded.
Well, good day, everyone. Pleased to be here introducing this webinar today on the top 20 best managed governments. This has indeed been a very interesting study that's been done by Dale Weeks. He's our global expert on benchmarking. On our team, he's also a registered organizational excellence specialist. And Dale's background is one where he earned a BSc in mathematics and an MBA in finance. He's a very seasoned professional with proven business results, having worked in leadership and management positions with very innovative public and private sector organizations, such as the Minnesota and Florida Departments of Revenue, Control Data Corporation, General Mills, and Xerox Corporation. As a volunteer, he served on the board of the Global Benchmarking Network for quite some time, and his areas of specialty are leading change, strategic thinking, performance management, global benchmarking, and operational plan execution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dale, and he'll do this presentation for us today on the top 20. Take it away, Dale.
Okay, thank you, Dawn, for that nice introduction. Good morning to everyone, or afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be. Thanks for joining us. This is the release of our first of several global benchmarking reports to be forthcoming during 2025. This one is on government, but we've got another one another week or so on higher education, and then we'll do the K through 12 sector. We've got some members of our global benchmarking team that are interested in the startup ecosystem, all of the activity that many of us find across the world in startups. Still, the statistics say maybe 50% of those make it 5 years. Maybe it's 70-80% failure rate. So we're looking at the global startup ecosystem, where some of the top performers there, and then we'll look at also at healthcare. So those will be forthcoming between now and December. So the purpose of this webinar today is to just introduce this government benchmarking report that we put out. It's released in the last, we've completed it in the last few weeks. Dawn has got a web page development, and we'll have it out on that. We're going to spend a lot of time walking through the report. We're going to give you a summary today, and then get your reactions depending on what country you sit in or what country you represent, based upon your business involvement in response to the findings or recommendation. The first part of this, my presentation, will only take about 20 minutes. For 20 minutes out of an hour, hour and a half, and the next 40 to 60 minutes will be reactions, comments, and next steps. So it's not going to be a lot of reviewing all of the detail that's in the report. You can get a copy of that at your leisure afterwards, and so we'll proceed on that basis. So thanks very much for being here, and now we'll proceed with our agenda. 4 items on the agenda. Why government benchmarking now? Benchmarking has been around, as Dawn mentioned. I've been involved with both the public and private sector. Xerox, a company I was employed with in the early 1970s, pioneered, at least in the United States, benchmarking in the business sector. However, you can go back and say, well, the Japanese really focused in the post-World War II period of government benchmarking. So it's been around for a long time. Why are we focused on government benchmarking now? Most of it relates back to where I have been in the last 10, 15, 20 years. I worked 20 years or so in the private sector with the companies Dawn mentioned of General Mills, Control Data Corporation here in the state of Minnesota where I sit. And but I worked for about 20 years in the public sector and worked in the Minnesota Department of Revenue, some very enlightened leadership there, and then went to the Florida Department of Revenue, Tallahassee, Florida, where we were close to becoming an award winner of the Baldrige at a national level, but won the state Sterling Award back in the early 1998, 2000s, and so forth. So why government benchmarking now? We're going to talk about that, talk about the system, what we view as a government system to be able to give you a context for managing it and metrics perhaps, and then the insights and results from our report, and then spending the rest of the amount of time on next steps. That's where we're at. Okay, let me explain a little more about why global government benchmarking report now. And this is just 4 bullet items. Many of you on the line today could probably offer more, but most organizations, I said I worked at the Florida Department of Revenue in the year 2000 or so for 10, 11 years. We went through an effort then to look at things called horizontal management. But most organizations, I would submit today, are still managed by hierarchy, top down, command and control. Citizen trust, you see that reference here. If you look at some work that has been done over the last 20 years or so in Canada, for example, as a country, there's an institute that still exists today called the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service, ICCS. And they have done for probably the better part of 20 years, every year or two, they do a citizen satisfaction survey. And a lot of, in Canada, trust in government has gone down. If you look at both Canada, United States, and across the world, citizens have lost trust in the government to the point that it's below 50%. Many citizens have lost trust in government. Part of what Canada did, and that's one of the bases for this report, is look at what does excellence in government mean in terms of establishing trust in government. And then beyond that, in terms of this excellence material, excellence frameworks, excellence principle, excellence best practices. When you look at what Dawn has done over the last 10 years or more, assess by sector where the public in general is and where organizations are, and the real final evaluation, it's similar to what exists in the startup world. Maybe 5 to 10% if you're really an optimist like me. The 20% of organizations or individuals know what this excellence framework relates to. So we've got, after 35 to 40 years out there, I was involved in the Baldrige process here in the state of Minnesota in the 1980s. But we've got maybe 20%, if we're really an optimist, that have awareness, number one, and number two, have applied some of the principles of practices in excellence. And then when you drill that down into the specific government arena, today, with what's happening here in the United States, most of us know about that, what's happening in other countries. So you look at trust in government, you look at excellence in government, there's not many organizations or individuals that know what it is. So we thought, gee, let's do a report that relates to government excellence, and what are the top 20? Who can we learn from? Who is out there leading the world? So how did we approach it? We said, okay, many of us involved in this excellence stuff have been aware of Dr. Deming and others who said, it's not the people, it's the system. So what's the system? And who is managing the government system? So we came up with pretty traditional, but still it represents a national government system that you could apply to any government in any country, most likely, where you do a plan, do, check, act, set the strategic direction, develop the strategic plan, develop operational plans, monitor and improve. So that's the system we're looking at. So when you look at what we're assessing countries, it's based upon how well is a country managing this government system. That's what we're looking at. So what were the conclusions, and how did we go about it? Selection criteria. I have been involved in the government, as I mentioned, for quite a few years. So we went out and looked at the 20 best using a structured and formal benchmarking process, where you take the history, perhaps, of what the father in the United States, who came from Xerox, Robert Camp, put together, but we use that structure, a study of focus on government performance. So we're looking at citizen satisfaction, public sector employee engagement, financial stewardship, and public trust in government. So we're looking at that. How satisfied, as I mentioned, with what they did initially in Canada with citizen satisfaction, public sector employee engagement. There's an organization out there, been there for many years, used to do polling in the political arena, but has now gotten into the organizational arena, called Gallup. They have done studies by sector of how satisfied are employees. So we brought that data in. Financial stewardship. How well are countries managing the finances they're provided by their taxpayers? And then public trust. So we're looking at those 4 areas for assessing. And then over the past 5 to 10 years, how have they maintained it? So it's not an immediate today. It's not a one time. And what we look at is the top 20 nations here. And what we came up with some of the Scandinavian countries, very strong in terms of performance. Finland, Denmark, Norway, in terms of overall performance. Then you've got some of the Asian countries, and you got some European countries. But then the one that stats out, number 1, Singapore, South Korea. You've got some service value chain, which is the process structure they looked at in Canada. So Canada comes along with New Zealand. And so you've got innovation there, and you've got governance that's emerging in the United Arab countries. Some of us have been involved with the Global Benchmarking Network, and the head of that, Rob Mann, has had to focus on that area of the world, that region. So the United Arab Emirates. So you see this, and you look at it, and you go, okay, if those are the top 20 nations based upon these multi-level success factors, where are the big performers? The United States is not here. It doesn't even come close to some of these other nations. And if I go back and look at the top GDP, gross domestic product, countries in the world, United States and China, not here. Germany, we've got some representation from Germany. United Kingdom is here, and Canada is there. But there is a lag here. Now, there's some reservation as far as Canada, because I mentioned this study that Canada has done over many years. They did one in 2023. Citizen satisfaction in Canada was way down below 50%, 47, 48% when you look at the data. So although Canada is in here, there's still some concern, and we can talk about that when we get to the discussion stage of how far along, and as we came through. Canada went through COVID. We all went through COVID, and we suffered some regression in their metrics. So although you see a country like Singapore, and what we looked at here is not just the data in individual countries. Singapore is a country that has been around for not that many years. It didn't exist in the 1960s, but they have gone out and built a country, small country, 5, 6, 7 million people, but they have got some extraordinary achievements in terms of how their government operates. So these are the top 20 countries. And so we're going to talk about later, when you get to the report, beyond this and so forth, what do you want to do to compare against? So what did we come up with in the report for recommendation? Traditional stuff, you do a report. Well, we said, how do we want to build? And that's why we're here today. That's why we're releasing this report. We want to build a coalition of the willing. If you go to the United Nations and say there's 200 countries, if that's the right number, what's the coalition of the willing that want to get together? Dawn mentioned I worked with the Florida Department of Revenue, the Minnesota Department of Revenue. We had a coalition of the willing. I went around over a multi-year period and went to probably touched all of the 50 state revenue agencies. And we got eventually 10, 15, or 20 agencies that wanted to be a coalition of the willing to build a focus on excellence across states. Now, this case, we're dealing with government. So we're asking those that are willing to look at the report, are they at a point to join our coalition of the willing? And then what does that mean? Come together for what? Then we've said in this a global community of practice. Those that have been involved in this excellent stuff have some idea of a global community of practice. What it is, sort of what I was referring to about our revenue agencies. But you get 10, 15, 20 countries that are coming together that say, gee, if Singapore has done this, why can't we? If South Korea has done something, why can't we? Who is leading? It's sort of what Dawn and I have talked about for many years of how do you build community of practice. It's sort of like the Olympics. It says who's in the top, who's the top performers, and then you do your gap analysis that says, okay, if the United States is not there, where's the gap and how can we learn and build a community of practice around continual improvement of those. So when we do another one of these reports in another year or so, that ranking in terms of the top 20 would hopefully change and some of those that would move up. So that's what our report is about. I haven't spent a lot of time on all our sources. We had, I think, a list of probably 25 or 30 independent sources in putting this together. So this is not just looking at the data that's out there, it's talking to people. We didn't do site visits, but I think we've got the equivalent of, a lot of good practices that have existed over many years and where they are today. So what we want to do now is spend time with those of you that are on the line with us today and say, okay, this is our report. This is what we're saying. You can get a copy of the report. Are you willing to be a participant in this process of building that coalition of the willing? So you go to the countries you represent, you go to the clients you represent, and then say, okay, can we bring them together to be able to say, gee, we got 20, but if we got top 20, and if you use the number 200, we got a lot of countries that we can bring together. So some of the bigger countries of the world, because where we stand, where I sit in the United States, I've been fortunate in the what Dawn mentioned to work for Minnesota Department of Revenue that went out and we did the normal Minnesota Quality Award process and the Florida Department of Revenue, but not many. How do we build this global benchmarking community of practice to the point where it's not 10 or 20% of our organizations that are doing it, 40, 50 more percentage to say that are out there that are comparing themselves to the best in the world. It's not sufficient enough just to say, okay, we're doing better perhaps in Minnesota than Iowa, Nebraska, but it's comparing yourself to the best in the world, which is Singapore or China or wherever that happens to be. So that's where I want to leave it. Dawn, you can take it back from here and moderate our discussion and next steps. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dale, very much. I think in terms of the benchmarking report, which everyone will get a copy and will also be sharing on our website shortly, it's very interesting because the report, first of all, educates the reader a little bit about the benchmarking process, so you know how this work is done. And then it shares all these wonderful sources of information for the data that we use in selecting these top 10 and 20 countries. So very educational in that respect, and it allows us to consider our own country using similar sources, and that information is very accessible. So it's a wonderful resource, and it should be up on our website shortly, but we'll send you a copy in advance. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can just open it up to have a nice discussion, sharing our thoughts and ideas and asking our questions and so forth. So just bear with us here for a sec.